I haven't gone cold enough, dark enough with a brown. This really dark brown. I think he's using, well, I don't know whether he's using monastial blue rather than Prussian blue, and it's slightly blacker. Monastial blue is something that Leslie Worth used. It's a blue that they don't produce anymore. There's a bit of darkening in it. So if you've got Payne's grey, you could put some Payne. The other interesting thing is that I looked at the sky and I thought, now I wonder if he put his wishy-washy yellow over the entire sky area and then went over the blue areas and left some of the yellow. Thin yellow wash, and he went over all the sky area first, the blue over the top, the thin blue wash, but left some of the yellow just peeping out. Interesting. When you start copying these things, you think, well, how on earth did they do that?
Yes. Yeah.
It is a greeny grey blue, isn't it?
Oh.
To Carol, in order to get it dark enough, you need a different type of blue, a blue that has a bit of black in it. So if you've got any Payne's grey available, you could try putting a little bit of Payne's grey into your brown mixture and just see if that doesn't darken it a bit, because it may look dark on the screen, but believe me, the colour of mine is too reddy brown compared to his. Yeah. When I look at that colour there, which is along the horizon line, what I think I mixed, it's very difficult to see it now, but it's something that looked a bit like that. Now that's made up of a bit of Prussian blue, a bit of probably vermilion, and a bit of raw sienna, but you have to be careful about how much vermilion you put in. Tiny. And try it out on a piece of paper like you did with the sky colours before you actually apply it to your picture, because when I first put mine on, I made it too dark. If I sort of compare mine to his, it's not bad. His is quite, you can see red and green in it, actually. It's got a bit more colour than mine, but I don't think it matters. I think, it's a suggestion of sort of maybe a hedge or something.
Yeah.
And then try it out on your strip of paper, dry it, try it out on the strip of paper, and just see what it looks like before you actually apply it to your painting. Can you see it? Of the picture that we're going to copy, the second one. And I've done it really quickly and loosely, I haven't tried to be very accurate with it. I'm obviously reasonably accurate, but I'm not going to worry about tracing it down. I'm going to actually take the tracing off, put it on a piece of white paper on one side of me, and then I'm going to draw the image freehand onto my watercolour paper using a very few lines, because I think tracing down takes time. And that's why I say to you, don't do it too carefully. If you look at mine, Chris, the main things I saw was this big dark shape, which is of three cottages or three buildings. Really the most important line, I think, is the line to the left of the buildings, which is the horizon line. With this picture that he did with the other one, anybody can say, yes, he's made the sky area very large. So how do you describe the eye level then? Yes. Mm-hmm. So he's probably sitting down on a chair, I would think, maybe drawing this view, sitting down. He's not standing up in an elevated position looking down on it, is what I'm trying to say. The sense is he's sitting down looking up at these cottages and this big tree, and then he's got this immense area of sky. If you've done that tracing, have you done that tracing? I think he's used a rough, I think he's used a cold press Arches, ARCHES paper with a rough finish, not a smooth finish. I think that has enabled him to drag the brush more easily over the surface of the paper. Other thing, Carol, and anybody else who's at this stage, when I was doing I'll go back to my painting. When I was doing my bit of work on it yesterday, I thought to myself, this is really hard, even with a dry brush, to get that sort of texture he's achieved. So I resorted to using my little natural sponge. I didn't abandon the dry brush technique. The dry brush technique is in there, but I didn't feel it was convincing enough. So I ended up using the sponge as well. Tracing paper off the photocopy.
Yep.
And you can place it on a piece of white paper, not watercolour paper, just any piece of white paper. See it so you can actually see the simple, look, if I do it with mine, if I put a piece of white paper underneath here, it simplifies things. It means I can actually see the lines I've traced.
Yeah.
And then I would copy those lines absolutely as accurately as I could onto my watercolour paper.
Yes.
And I do it by eye. So you just have to keep checking what you're drawing, make sure that it's an accurate copy of this.
Yeah.
But well, I didn't think there was. I thought it'd be better just not tracing down today and using the image on the tracing paper and the original or photocopy that you've got and working from that and then drawing it freehand onto your piece of new watercolour paper. Okay, what I was doing as I was looking at this, I mentioned it to Carol before you came on, is that this bit of my painting, this where the tractor's been, it could do with a bit more colour.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So I'm looking at his and I'm thinking, I think it looks like it's got a little chintzy wincy bit of, dare I say it, burnt sienna in it. So I've taken some burnt sienna and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of Prussian blue and make a sort of soft colour and then paint it over here and see if I can just finish that little bit off. It's not a great deal. Carol doesn't think I need to make my trees darker, but I feel uncomfortable with my trees in so much as, to me, they look very red compared to his, the colour, but it's going to be tricky now that they're the weight they are. I just feel they need to be, maybe I'm just going to make a wash of something that's a bit greyer, darker brown and go over the branches and the trees in places just to cool it down a bit.
Okay. His eyes look lighter, don't they?
I was
His
wondering.
look lighter.
Lighter?
Well, the trees look sort of as if they've got fog or something on the front.
These, you mean?
Yes, yes.
I think it's how they're appearing in the camera. Look at that. Sorry.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. I get it.
I'm sorry. The camera's over to the left of this book, and I can't put it where I am because I would have to not be here at all. I've got my tracing here. Yes, I would start with the sky because that's really what you should start with.
Right.
Well, it's the traditional way with a painting in landscape and most other painting really is that you start at the top and you work down.
Oh, okay.
I suppose if you're doing a portrait, you could arguably work from the eyes outwards. There's many ways of working with a portrait. We're not doing a portrait, we're doing a landscape. And with a landscape, I'm sure Carol will agree with me, you start at the top and work down, don't you, Carol?
I would think so, yes. I think you need that background colour.
Yes.
Yes, everything is going to relate a bit to the sky, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, if you look at this picture, well, I know it's quite tricky. This is a printout, obviously, but I think I would dampen the whole of this all the way down to the horizon line. And then I would probably, before I start, I might even have 1, 2, 3 greys mixed up. Now, again, it looks as though there's something a bit warm in here up the top.
Really?
Yeah, on my picture anyway. I mean,
Well, not on my printout, but yes, okay.
wouldn't be a bad idea. And this needs to be super pale to mix up some possibly raw sienna and a very, very diluted version of it. And instead of using water, I think I'll possibly paint over the whole of the sky area with some pale raw sienna.
Oh, okay.
But before you do that, I'd also have a couple of greys ready mixed up, because there's quite a lot of fusing going on in this picture, especially at the top of the paint picture. I mean, it looks like he's put the grey into that damp wash of raw sienna.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing I would suggest, looking at it as well, it almost looks as though he's used a dry sponge on the edge of the clouds in places to create that sort of texture that he's made.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right, I'm just going to turn the page back for a minute. A great deal of insight into the way he worked. I was just saying before you came on that I think he used a Arches cold pressed rough finish watercolor paper. And the reason, well, last week what we did do is we explored dry brush technique, because when you look closely at his painting, it looks as though he has used quite a bit of dry brush technique in this particular one, especially around the trees.
Yes, for that ivy on the trees, yeah.
Yeah, and there is a bit of it here as well, you know, along the left-hand side of the fence and the gate, and then a bit on the horizon line.
Okay.
And even in the foreground where this the furrow from the tractor is. So this is why I say I think he used a really rough finish paper. However, last week we tried to do it by practicing using a dry brush and very little paint, and actually literally, I'll show you mine, scrubbed it into the paper like that. So this was all dry brush technique.
I see.
I know it looks like a bit like a scribble, but I was literally scrubbing my brush into the with very little paint on it to get what paint was in it out onto the paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually it is quite effective, but you know, I then reverted to using a sponge, Prue.
Oh yes.
Because I thought, well, actually I just don't feel this is quite working because my paper's not rough enough. And I used a sponge in it. Now, I think in the second painting, well, I don't want to discuss it in too much detail, but it looks as though he has used the sponge in the sky and round the top of this tree, and even down here on the where the this sort of area of the distance is.
Right.
But I think a lot of it is to do with the fact the paper is rough. And he's not sort of, kind of putting loads and loads of wet paint in it. I mean, he is in places because it's all looked beautifully fused down here. And in this previous one, there is fusing of the colour, and that like the sky. Now, again, the sky area in this painting I thought was interesting because when I first did it, I just put the yellowy colour in the areas where I thought it was coming in the picture, and painted the blue separately onto damp paper after having done the yellow. And then I looked at it when it was dry, and I thought the blue was coming up too blue, and it looks as though he has actually taken this very weak solution of whatever it is, gambosia with a tiny bit of vermilion, and he's taken it over the entire sky area and then put the blue over the top and left
Right.
areas of yellow.
Right. Okay.
And I did that with mine in the end. I then took blue over everything, sorry, yellow wash over it. It's possibly gone a fraction too dark, but it's much more in keeping with what he's done, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yours looks a bit green, a bit more green on the screen.
Yes, well, it's stronger. That's why, because, you know, I think if in retrospect, if I'd have done it with the way I've just described,
Yeah.
it would have ended up correct. You know, I think that's how he did it. I think he put a very, very thin yellow wash over the entire sky area and then did the
Right.
blue.
Right. Okay.
Grey in to darken your brown
Yes.
mixed